Mike, they said that they want to hear you singing the national anthem.
Ouviram do Ipiranga as margens plácidas.
Amazing. Ok, so Mike, primeiro lugar, acho que a gente pode começar em português, só para todo mundo acreditar que você é
Tá ótimo.
brasileiro de verdade.
Perfeito. Vamos nessa.
But seriously, I guess we have to speak English. But that's, I think, proof. Mike, thank you so much for being here. I am honored. I think we're all honored. You don't really do this often because you are more into actually building things than talking about building things, I think. So we're super excited to learn from you today. For those of you who don't know, the reason I get this amazing opportunity is because I happen to be lucky enough to go to high school with Mike. So we're going to start big and existential, Mike, and then we're going to go into small questions, like more specific questions. We only have 30 minutes, so I'll make the best of it. First, creating Instagram was clearly a very long and crazy and arduous journey. If you could sum up the 3 biggest lessons you learned during that journey, what would they be?
Ooh, I think, well, first of all, great to be here, and I wish I could actually be here, but it's, I guess this rectangle is the next best thing. The 3 biggest ones, I'd say the first one is something somebody said to me, which is, it's never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is. And that just proved to be true over and over again. You know, it would be, you know, things were going really well, and, you know, you think everything's going to be perfect, and then, like, you know, your favorite engineer quits, or, you know, something changes and growth slows down. And meanwhile, like, you get passed on by the VC fund you thought was, you know, like the perfect fit for you, and you don't know how you're going to fundraise, and then you figure it out the following week. And it's, you know, I think maybe to a fault, I have like a high and low pass filter on my emotions, and I think that served me well. Although I'd say the flip side is, like, when we got bigger, the team would often be like, Mike, why don't we celebrate milestones? Like, we hit 100 million users. Like, we should celebrate that. I'm like, no. Like, the next goal, the next milestone. So I think it's about finding that balance of, like, not letting every day kind of, like, you know, jerk you around as much as it can, but also, you know, occasionally taking stock and saying, like, all right, if we zoom out, how are things going? Like, how's the team doing? How are we, like, thinking about, like, where we want to go in the world? So that's a big one. Second one is, like, the power of focus. You know, we were just 2 of us up to launch, and we were 6 engineers when we sold. And, you know, people point at that and try to draw a bunch of different conclusions from it. I think the main conclusion you can draw is that we were very bad at hiring. We just didn't have, like, a good recruiting engine going, and we should have been like 20 engineers probably at the time. We had like 10 million people using the, or even more. So, like, that was a failure to hire more than like a perfect design. But it did create a tremendous amount of focus. So, you know, every week we would start and look at the product and look at the feedback and look at the graphs and say, all right, by Friday, where do we want to be? And of course, it's impossible, like, important to have longer term thinking and zoom out at times as well. But the focus that comes from having a small team is incredible. And I think it's so easy to lose that as your team scales. And you start doing projects because you can, not because you absolutely have to. Or, you know, teams need to justify their existence, so they start building things to justify their. It stops. It inverts from, like, solving the absolute most essential problems that you can solve in that time to being more about, like, an organization that wants to perpetuate itself. So the power of focus would be the second one. And then the third is just not being attached to, you know, what we call them internally sacred cows. Like, it was so easy, or it is easy, I think, to define yourself based on what the product has been or what the company has been, and lose sight of why it got there in the first place. I'll give you an example, which is, like, we had square photos from the beginning. Like, that's what every Instagram photo was. And at one point, you know, we had this debate, like, oh, should we allow this? Like, in retrospect, sounds obvious, but, like, should allow people to post, like, vertical photos or skinny long photos? And we were debating this internally, and half the team was like, "You're going to ruin Instagram." Like, if I could have, like, you know, like a little token for every single time that somebody internally thought we were going to ruin Instagram with something, like, we'd have a lot of them. And this is one of them. And at some point, somebody in the meeting was like, "All right, let's, like, try to pretend that we're not in this meeting and that we're, like, outside the window looking in. Like, would we think we were, like, having a sane discussion, or do we think we're crazy?" And we started looking at the stats and like, sure, we had square photos, but something like 25% of photos uploaded to Instagram then would use those apps to create borders on the top or the bottom so that they could post a vertical image. So like effectively the decision had been made for us. We were just like internally holding on to some image of what we had been when we launched. Same when we added videos and same when we added stories. It like, I mean, and the same debate was the same, had the same tenor to it internally. Like, we're going to ruin everything. Like, is this what Instagram's about? And I think if you're not crisp about what problem you're actually trying to solve in the world and why you exist and what you're trying to build towards, you'll keep falling into those situations where you're defining the like current manifestation of the product rather than the like reason that you exist in the world.
Amazing. So one, things are never as good or as bad as they seem. I really identify with that. And number two, focus. And number three, don't hold on too much to what you set out to build, but maybe focus more on the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think that captures it perfectly.
Awesome. Awesome, Mike. Okay, so the second one is a little bit more of a hairy question. You built something that changed the world. And I know that a lot of people, a lot of journalists, a lot of our friends have sent you things like, oh, Instagram has caused so much damage in the world, it's done so much psychological harm, etc. And then we also know that Instagram has enabled incredible opportunities for business, for people to communicate in times of war, etc. When you look back at this crazy journey at building something that was sort of a small project that turned into sort of a world-changing thing, I guess, how do you reflect on it? Is it pride? Is it not? What are you proud of, and what are you not proud of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question any entrepreneur like that reaches any kind of skill has to grapple with. I had a really interesting conversation with the person I'm working with as my coach maybe 2 years ago, and I was talking about like, oh, eventually I want to start something new, and I like want it to be as like big and impactful as Instagram. You'll never know. Like, there's no like cosmic accounting that says like this was a net positive for the world, or it was like 80% net positive and this percent negative, and like it's impossible. These things are way fuzzier than that. I think the things I'm proudest of were the team and culture we built. That even by the time we left, we were 500 engineers, maybe 1,000 people total. And I've since gotten to see some of those folks go and either start companies themselves, go run mobile teams at other companies, and try to bring kind of a little bit of what we try to build and the culture that we try to establish in other places. And that, I think that is actually the thing I'm proudest of. And the thing I missed the most when I left was actually getting to work with those folks day in and day out. The other piece is just like product craft and polish. It's something that we really, took on from like the very beginning. Like, we didn't try to do everything. We tried to do fewer things better. And I think that's harder to do as the product scales and different priorities get, your product gets pulled into different ways. But by and large, at least, something we really tried to do while we were there was really keep that focus. And I think it showed. And I think that people often would reflect on like, oh, like, this is a product I like using. It's a product that feels like it's smooth and easy and well designed. And I think that's a thing I can continue to be proud of. And then the part that's like more mixed is just like knowing like where, like, again, like what is the cosmic accounting for the impact? Like, I think we created a bunch of opportunities and jobs. Like, I'd hear all the time about people that were like starting small businesses and like Instagram was their storefront. Actually a ton in Sao Paulo. Like, I remember going in like 2016 and just meeting with a bunch of entrepreneurs that had basically created businesses out of nothing because they now had a storefront. It was like WhatsApp for the transactions and Instagram for the storefront. For example, I meet plenty of people that like got married because they met on Instagram. I get told all the time, although I was already dating somebody who I'm not married to, when I started Instagram, that like
Mike?
Instagram's the best dating app in the world. Yeah.
I don't know if you could
Did you
hear me,
lose
but
me?
I'm actually getting married to someone I met on Instagram.
Oh yeah, they cut your audio while I'm talking, but that's awesome.
Sorry, keep going. I just had to
Yeah.
mention that. So yes, that's a use case.
Yeah. And then I think the part, just to be honest, that's like the hardest to untangle is like, what happens just because you get very big and you start being less a reflection of an individual product and more a reflection of, I think by the time I left Instagram, I had something like 1 billion people using it every month. Like, that 1 billion people, you're going to have all the good and all the bad in the world, right? And I think the question that we try to ask ourselves, and I think it's the kind of core question that any platform of skill has to ask itself, is like, all right, like, what is our role in like shaping positive things throughout the world? And have some humility there, which is like everything has a second order unintended consequence. So like knowing that you can't know perfectly what it's going to do, but also like what are the challenges and harms that we're uniquely creating, you know? So I think like digital overuse is one of them. One of the last projects we shipped before we left was the ability to set yourself a timer around like, all right, I want to use Instagram at most 15 minutes a day. And eventually iOS and Android built this into their OSs, which I think is even better at a system level. But, you know,
Mike, it's great. It must be crazy to have to create a thing that prevents people from using the thing that you created and tried to grow, right?
right. It is. It's. I mean, it's interesting too because like if you're a purely growth oriented company, like I don't think you can build that, or like it would just be a hard thing to build. But I think if you take a longer term perspective, it's like you want to be creating long term healthy, like people to have a healthy long term relationship with your product rather than a like one where they like use it but don't feel great about it in the end. So I think you like it's one of those trading off the short term for the long term things. Like for sure, I don't remember the exact numbers when we shipped it. Like usage went down in some parts because some people were like literally using it for hours. Now, like maybe they cap themselves at 30 minutes, which is still like a lot of time to use any product in a given day. But I think the average now for TikTok is over an hour, which is pretty wild if you think about it. Like 120, 1/16 of your waking hours are spent on TikTok. So anyway, yeah, I think the understanding what new behaviors you've created and doing your best to yeah, just either make people aware of them or mitigate them in whatever ways make sense. But I think all of it you have to approach with a bit of the humility that like, you know, you're ultimately like you stop being a product and you start being more of like your own like country or like, you know, state in a sense because you're so large and there's so many different parts of the world using your product.
That's awesome, Mike. What really strikes me from your answer is that like we're all thinking like, what did you change in the whole world? And you're like, I built an incredible team, and I built an incredible product, and like that's what all of us are trying to do, right? We're trying to build incredible teams and incredible products, and we don't know what impacts that can have in the long run. That's what we can touch today and tomorrow. Now, changing to a little bit more of a lighter topic, and Mike, I'm going to ask you to speak louder and slower because people don't have English as their first language, please. My question is, I saw that you once had to revive Instagram while you were drunk. So please tell us about that.
The story is going to pursue me to the end of time. I think it's even on my Wikipedia page, which is pretty funny. Yeah, this is, you know, we were scaling up the product really quickly and our team was tiny. So we had 6 engineers total at the time and only 2 of them working on the infrastructure side of things. And we happened to be, you know, this is going to make me sound like a huge party animal. I'm really not. But like we were, you know, me and the other infrastructure engineer both went out and, you know, both had, you know, some drinks. And the next day his name was Shane, was the other infrastructure person. And I turned to him and I said, Shane, like, I was looking at the logs and it looks like the site went down for a little bit yesterday. And then like, did you fix it? Because it came back up. And he's like, nope. And I was like, really? And then I was like, did I fix it? And I was like, oh man, I totally fixed it. I have no memory of fixing it. But you know, it was really
After having
crazy.
fixed Instagram.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we were so, it was a phase where like I couldn't. It's actually funny. I was actually on another call and my wife was on, and somebody who's known us for a long time was recounting a story of I used to go shower and ask her like, please look at this graph, and if this number gets above this number, like just run in and yell at me because I need to go fix the site. So the first few years, like we didn't really have a big enough team to support the scale that we were running at, and there was a lot of craziness.
Amazing. I didn't realize you had that extra member in your team when you were in the shower, but I think she deserves a lot of
Yes.
credit.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a little more seriously, Mike, I know you still have an amazing relationship with your co-founder, Kevin Systrom. And co-founder relationships are super hard. They can be harder than marriages sometimes. Tell us about, I don't know, did you have any disagreements with Kevin ever? Were there hard discussions that you had to have that you remember? Or any lessons that you learned from those experiences that allowed you to have such a great relationship in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons we were able to, you know, do what we did for as long as we did, which is like we both trust and respect each other and still do to this day. So I think when I've reflected on our relationship before, I think the core of it, I mean, beyond trust, which is like he's a person I trust completely, and I feel like he's always had his back, and I hope I've always had his, is this really nice overlap without being complete of our interests. So we both love product and we collaborate on that side of things, but I like the infrastructure piece. I like building. I like the like deep engineering details, which he does as well. But he maybe goes deeper on the business front. And there's always like we can speak each other's language, but and there's overlap in the middle. But the co-founder pairs where I've seen go most wrong are when they both think they have the same job, or there's another job that needs to be done that neither wants to do, and like just having clarity around like what are the jobs that need to get done at this company, and together do we cover most of them, or do we need to hire somebody, or do we need to decide that that's like just not important right now, but make sure that we're both not trying to do the same job. But I think that relationship, I mean, it's a little hard to screen for. We in some ways we got lucky that we had that relationship, but at least being really clear on what the relationship is that you're trying to establish and what your different responsibilities are was really key. But for sure, there were times where, the site early on, like the site was blowing up, we were trying to scale it, and, we had different ideas on how to solve the problem. And, we'd like get into like a technical discussion, and, 5 minutes later we'd be okay. I think in almost all of in probably most relationships, but I think it's very true with co-founder pairs. Like, I think it's okay to have passion in there. In fact, it's a good thing, but just not hold on to things so much that you're like going home angry and you're like, it's more like, whew, flared up. All right, now we can like, move forward or try one of the options. And if it doesn't work, go with the other option. I think that like getting it out, getting it through. But honestly, I've been happily surprised by how many, founder pairs I've talked to recently that like are working with a coach together, or like have gone through like different programs to help communication. And it sounds, maybe like woo woo, but I actually think it's super important when it comes to like basically like the second most important relationship in your life potentially.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, Brian and I have the same job, so maybe I have to find a new job, but that's good to know now and not later. So awesome. One more thing, Mike, and this is a little bit more of a macro question, okay? So at Duolingo, one thing I learned about Latin Americans, because of our access to data, I guess, is that Brazilian men were the most likely people to take their English tests without a t-shirt on. They like to take it just more free. I don't know, maybe they were in Rio or whatever. I think, being Brazilian, I think we all understand that behavior. Not that we approve of it, but we understand. But anyways, it's a beautiful insight into human nature and how Brazilians live. My question to you is, you've obviously had incredible access to really interesting data about Brazilian or Latin American behavior. And I'm wondering if there's anything you can share, either that can inspire us in terms of, okay, this is interesting about us, like as a reflection and potentially yield ideas, or just, this is funny, let me talk about it.
I think we probably had the same insight at Instagram for selfies. No, we actually, as we grew, we finally had people like data scientists like join the company and do research projects. And I remember one woman spent a summer internship. She was a PhD student studying like research and data and human psychology. She spent a summer trying to understand our user base. And one of her core insights was like, what percentage, I remember her presentation, so I was like, what percentage of photos in each country are selfies and of people versus like animals and like things. And like Brazil was like 80%. It was like by far the country with like the most photos that are either selfies or photos of people, which I think is pretty great. The other one that I think is interesting that's less of like a personality thing was one that was actually shared between Brazil and Indonesia. So we were looking in the stats once, and the number of photos deleted in those countries was really high. And we thought like, wow, like, is there some bug? Is there some like spam problem? Like, why are people deleting so many photos? Like, that's weird. And we ended up realizing it was because there were stores, and it was basically people would post like, vende-se, like I made this thing, I'm selling this donut, or I'm selling this necklace. And then once it was sold, like they would delete it. And we actually had to like tune our spam filters to allow for that behavior. And it was like by far more prevalent in countries that have like big WhatsApp, penetration where people are used to like transacting over digital, like don't have a bunch of stores. Like I've, driven in like very rural parts of Brazil, and like the like one bar in the town will have like a hand painted sign with the WhatsApp number on it, right? It's like it's so interesting how like the digital evolution happens so differently in different countries. And what we saw at Instagram was for sure that side of like the e-commerce side was far more developed and far more interesting, I thought, earlier in Brazil and countries like Brazil than it was in the US, for example.
So at Duolingo, we didn't actually change anything about the app by observing behaviors in different countries. I'm now wondering, and that's, I think, controversial. Most people think that you need to localize and internationalize, and we just didn't, because keeping the code super vanilla made it a lot easier to iterate in the long term. I'm wondering if you guys, understanding that there was, for example, all of this amazing potential for e-commerce in markets like Indonesia or Brazil, made changes that were country specific based on those learnings, or if you chose to keep the code quote unquote vanilla as well.
For the longest time, it was very vanilla. The exceptions were what we thought of more as plugins. So, for example, you could share your Instagram photos to Facebook and Twitter, and so we'd go do market research in Japan. And Japan, they were using a platform called Mixi. I don't know if it's still around. But we'd built the sharing system to be a bit more pluggable. So when you were in Japan, you could share to Mixi, but we didn't show that in other countries. And, for the sort of brief amount of time where we weren't blocked in China, there was a Chinese specific share. I think you could share to Weibo for a while on Instagram. So those tweaks. And then I think the other side, which I think is the maybe more interesting thing we did internationally, was like you try to learn like in what ways are countries ahead of the curve on a behavior that you want to bring internationally. So I mentioned like e-commerce in Brazil was definitely one of them. Another one was actually in Japan as well. I remember I would try to send our engineers or even go myself on some of these research trips where you just spend a lot of time talking to people in every country. And in Japan, one of the insights was, this is especially true about how they used Twitter at the time. They would have a Twitter for their baseball interests, and a Twitter for their, like work interests, and a Twitter for their personal interests. And they have all these sort of like individual accounts with individual following lists. And we actually took that insight, and that's why we added the multi-account switching, so you could have multiple accounts and switch between them. And that was interesting because that wasn't necessarily a demand that a lot of other countries had, but we saw how it was powerful in one country, and we decided to like just build it and ship it for everybody, and then see how different countries would use it.
That's awesome, and I'm very thankful because it allowed me to create an Instagram account for my dog. But it's not very popular.
That ended up being the biggest use case.
That is a very popular use case. Yes, great. Just a side note, we did a similar trip to India, and we found that everyone was using Duolingo with their phone in English, even though they didn't speak English, which went against everything we believed about user behavior, and we had to create a specific case for India. Okay, cool. I love growth, Mike, so I'm wondering if you can give us some insights. And so in the first moments of Instagram, of course, creating something amazing that people want, iterating and being super focused and data-driven is important. But I'm wondering if there are a few growth levers or a few things that you did that just kind of led to exponential growth, or things you didn't expect that really worked and helped Instagram pick up in the early days.
Yeah, I think the first one was like creating the seed of the community early. So we had, at the time, you were allowed to have 100 beta testers on test flight. Now it's 10,000 when you're creating an iPhone app. And we were like, how are we going to spend these 100? And we decided that photographers were not going to love Instagram because the resolution was low and they were anti-filter. But we thought designers, like graphic or visual or UI designers, would enjoy it because we thought, we really were spending a lot of time with the design. And so we spent almost all of our 100 first invites, like pre-launch, inviting those folks on, like designers. And the effect was like day one when we launched, you didn't just go into an empty product. You went to a product that already had people using it and were, creating what was like at the time, like really unusual or unexpected quality of photos for a mobile app. So I think that's number one, is like, how do you seed that early community and who do you think of as your first group of people? And it was a lot of like literally going down the list of designers we respected and emailing them one by one saying, hey, we have a new thing that we'd love you to try. Will you come on? And, most said no, but some said yes. And that was a good kind of early thing. The other one was understanding like which platform we could grow off of, which at the time was Facebook and Twitter. So, building in good sharing capabilities to both those was important. It's really interesting because I think since then, both of those platforms have closed a lot of those avenues off. So I don't think you could scale in quite the same way. But I think it's more about understanding what's the kind of growth vector that's most powerful at the time. Company that I've been helping out a bit is called Locket, and it's like a home screen widget photo app for iPhone. And their hugest growth lever is people making videos about Locket on TikTok and sharing them. It's not even them creating them. It's like people naturally talking about the product and growing. And I wouldn't have expected that. That's a whole other generation of growth from when we were doing it. So I think just being conscious that like what worked for even the previous generation of apps almost by definition won't work anymore, because if things get big, then those growth avenues either get saturated or closed off. But being aware of like what's the next one that is going to be the big potential way of growing.
Great. And TikTok is almost like old news now. It's like Be Real. The cool kids are there now. I haven't figured out how to take a picture on Be Real without looking weird but whatever, we can talk about this later. This actually
no, it's funny that you bring that up, because there was actually a great article this week about people are now hiring for Be Real social media managers, but because of the dynamics of the product, I think the example, I forget which brand, they had put a Times Square advertisement up, and they sent their social media managers, and they had to wait like the whole day, literally waiting for the Be Real notification to like snap a photo to do. It's very broken right now. So, I think
it's like it will get fixed, not like society is broken and there is no repair.
I think the idea of marketing on Be Real feels very broken right now, but maybe they'll figure something out.
Nice. Well, that leads me to my last question, Mike, and thank you so much for your time here today. But last question is, as you said, what worked a long time ago doesn't work today anymore. We're all trying to figure out what's next, right? And to build for tomorrow. Any tips on things that you're observing that you think are interesting trends, or even how you go about thinking about that?
Yeah, I think I'll give you maybe the evergreen answer from me, which is like, no matter what the technology is, like you can't lose sight of the product and the people. And I feel like last year and a half was all about the Web3 hype cycle, which I think we're now in the doldrums of the hype cycle on the other side, and we'll maybe see interesting companies come out of even that challenge. But what I felt like was lost in so much of that conversation was the actual product piece and the user piece, and like what are people actually going to be doing, and will they find it easy? And I used to tell our team, because they would be like, we're using Postgres, should we be using this newer, cooler database? Like nobody out there cares what database you use. Like nobody cares what exact technology you use. Like they care that you've shipped something of value, and they care that you've done something interesting, and they care that you've created some value in their life. And I think that gets lost, especially when you get too focused on what the technology is versus what the product is. So that's, I think, an evergreen answer, but I think it becomes even more important as technology accelerates and we see new uses of AI. It's always bringing it back to what are you solving? What are you building? Is it easy to use? Is it creating value for somebody?
I hear a lot of people say we're solving this through AI, and it's like, but how? And what are people going to do with AI, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it's or papering over the lack of a real use case by focusing too much on the fact that it's on the blockchain. It's that could solve a problem and that could create a great user experience, but so far most of the time it's done the opposite. So that you need to put even more work if you really believe in the technology in the long run to make sure that the user experience is really great.
Amazing. Mike, we're at time, and you've been waiting and testing, so I'm so appreciative of the time you took to be here today. I know you have very important things to do, and you are a father. So thank you de coração, muito obrigada por retribuir ao Brasil e América Latina com seu conhecimento. We have claps here. I don't know if you can hear them.
I can. Obrigado a vocês. Eu adoro conversar sobre isso, especialmente com brasileiros e pessoal da Latam.
Obrigada, Mike. A gente se vê em breve.
Tchau.
Tchau.
Em breve. Tchau a todos.
Tchau.